Iwasaki Taku is one of the most creative minds in the musical world, someone who is always willing to take risks with his compositions and has a seemingly endless variety of music styles that he's comfortable writing in. It's hard to say how well known he is amongst anime fans because, simply put, I wouldn't be surprised either way if any random fan said they did or didn't know who he is. With shows like Akame ga Kill, Black Butler, Soul Eater, Bungo Stray Dogs, JoJo Part 2, The Irregular at Magic High School, and most famously Gurren Lagann under his belt, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that most anime fans have probably seen at least one show that he's written for. That also isn't accounting for some of his more niche works like Kamisama no Memo Cho, Bento, and Yakitate Japan, the third of which I haven't watched, but the more I read about the world of over-the-top competitive baking, the more intrigued I am. So before I put off making this video to go binge all 69 episodes of it, let's take a look at some of my favorites from Iwasaki and try to unravel the beautiful chaos that is his mind. It's easy to assume that because Iwasaki writes music for a lot of shows with darker themes, his music must always take on darker, edgier vibes to fit with it. He does of course write music like that, as we'll explore a little later, but more light-hearted pieces like this are not at all uncommon in his soundtracks, and with production as clean as this one, you can bet that they're all going to sound fantastic. This track from Kamisama no Memo Cho, Heaven's Memo Pad, is a simple thematic tune associated with, as the track title suggests, the character Alice. If you watched my previous video, you'll have seen me go over the piece Teddy, which serves as the basis for this track but conveys the much darker, heavier themes of the show. Alice in Computer Room is sort of like a bubbly electronic remix, taking away the haunting elements and harmonies from Teddy and swapping them out with playful syncopated synth lines. Suzy Kim's breathy vocals are also brightened up with a robotic filter, making the obvious connection to the techno-whiz Alice and her computer-filled room, but also more subtly making the music feel a bit less serious. Alice herself is often a stoic, logical character, but it's impossible to ignore the fact that she's always surrounded by stuffed animals and wearing teddy bear pajamas, and this track aptly reflects both sides of her character. Like I mentioned in the short analysis I did on Teddy, the lyrics don't seem to mean much in isolation, as they appear to be a random string of words and letters that seem like a password or code of sorts, something that makes a lot of sense given what we know about Alice. With this version's robotic filter, the lyrics almost get washed away into the mix, acting more like a standard non-lexical melodic instrument that helps build an atmosphere we can easily associate with a sci-fi control room. It's also important to mention that the lyrics from the chorus are cut out, likely because they become a bit more comprehensible, forming actual sentences and phrases for us to start making sense of. While I don't have a clear idea or memory of what these words and phrases are supposed to mean, if they actually mean anything, this isn't something I really have to question in this version, as the words themselves are hard to make out without already knowing what they are, and the lack of sentences from the chorus makes it easy to place your focus on the music rather than the meaning of the lyrics. This is a clever method of manipulating the music so that we aren't naturally drawn to the voice, something that our brains do unconsciously even if the words don't make sense or are sung in a language we can't understand. This clearly isn't the most complex composition Iwasaki has ever produced, but there's enough here that we can understand that even his simpler pieces of music can convey a lot of cleverness and thought. Say what you want about Akame ga Kill as a show, but never insult its music in front of me. This was the show where I heard Iwasaki's music and desperately had to know more about him, and I would say that to this day it's still one of his best soundtracks and one of the best anime soundtracks of all time. A shame given that the show itself is only decent at best and rage-inducingly stupid at worst. Most, if not all of the vocal music across Akame ga Kill's soundtrack is sung in gibberish. This isn't super rare in anime music, as you can hear it in Kazuya Yuki's music all the time, Kevin Penkin's as well, and Okabe Keiichi's, to name a few I'm more familiar with. What I find so incredible about Iwasaki's gibberish and Okabe's while he's fresh in our minds is that it is very much at the forefront and is written in a way that sounds like actual language. I don't mean this as an affront to Kazuya or Penkin, simply that if I were comparing something like Le Chant de Roma to Hanazebe Karadina or Credens Justitiam, Le Chant de Roma sounds more like actual language language and less like, well, gibberish. Whether the lyrics were actually written by Iwasaki himself or the singer Maya Baru, a lot of the linguistic realism can be attributed to the way the lyrics and vocal line are sung. But singing aside, there's something incredibly powerful about opening the piece up with a glissando from the violin soloist and then having them playing a fairly non-rhythmic pattern. The focus, much like the previous song, is on building the atmosphere, one we can immediately assume is quite heavy from the sawtooth-like drone, possibly a tampura, and deep strings in the background. By utilizing Middle Eastern sounds and playing styles, the music takes on a character that most Western music-influenced audiences will immediately think of as dark, despite the sung melody and violin soloist playing relatively mild and somewhat meditative lines. This works in two ways, as it gives the majority of viewers the sense of what kind of story this will be while also putting us in a calm before the storm headspace. This is then broken as the piece eventually swells into a rock fusion track by way of a war cry. And this is all but a slight demonstration of how Iwasaki conveys atmospheres by fusing musical styles that we might not initially think would complement each other as well as they do. Another reason I consider Akame ga Kill's soundtrack to be so great is that it really shows off just how willing Iwasaki is to take risks, some that could be argued not to work particularly well, especially if the listener isn't aware of the context for the music. Without any explanation as to what this piece is about, most people would probably hear this and think, what the hell am I listening to? And I agree, it's an extremely odd mix of romantic strings and harp with an electric guitar soloist with a fair amount of overdrive, but in context to what it is, it makes all the sense in the world. Esdeath is the main antagonist of the show, often depicted as unfairly powerful and imposing. As a character, she has a sadistic personality that has her toying with her defeated enemies until she decides to kill them off, and this gives reason to a lot of the music associated with her. Thick, overdriven guitars riffing and chugging away to liken her to some kind of heavy-hitting, adrenaline-fueled monster truck rally. And then she falls in love with the protagonist Tatsumi. Suddenly her sadism and dominatrix-like personality have taken a hit so comically unlike her that she almost becomes unrecognizable whenever Tatsumi is involved. This explains the extremely discordant fusion of classic romantic strings and overdriven guitar. Everything about the situation is so weird that the music needs to reflect this by being equally as weird, an opportunity that Iwasaki did not let go to waste. Surely this could have worked as just a string piece serving as an extreme contrast to Esdeath's character, or perhaps a slower ballad-esque guitar track. But it's this level of risk that I think pays off so much more by being a piece that somehow perfectly mixes while not really blending together at all. Okay, I promise this is the last one for Akame ga Kill. Here, Iwasaki has taken yet another sound of the other with a Balinese gamelan ensemble and kachuk. The kachuk, also known as the monkey chant, is a ritual-based dance usually performed by about 50 to 100 men. There are two main components of the chant itself, the slow chant to induce the trance-like state, and the more aggressive chant when the men wave their arms and cry out "Chuck" at will. These two sections are sampled heavily in the track, first starting with the calm section while the gamelan chimes play out a simple pattern, the drums gradually building in intensity. This acts as a calm before the storm section, common of battle music before a quick switch to the main battle theme, using a very rhythmic kachuk to occur while the band instruments drop in out of nowhere. This is such a wild mix when you consider what types of instruments and performers are coming together, yet it works so well that I couldn't imagine any other battle theme as fitting for the guerrilla warfare conducted by the members of Night Raid. There's a lot to be enthusiastic about when it comes to Iwasaki's crazy mixes, but there's also just as much to be blown away by when he tones things down and goes back to his classical roots. While the title of the piece seems like it would imply something worthy of his wild metal dubstep fusions, of which there are quite a few in Noragami's soundtracks, he instead pulls things back and goes for a simple string quartet. I can't recall the exact context where this piece is relevant in the show, but given the title and the season it appeared in, I think it's safe to assume that this is tied to Bishamon trying to kill Yato. The constant movement in the strings makes the music feel frantic, and how the cello acts changes this feeling of action or inaction. The piece itself plays out like a game of cat and mouse between hunter and hunted, with the cello's patterns indicating whether the two are engaged in combat or not. This can be heard when the cello drops out or plays high, taking on a character like the prey is hidden while the hunter gets closer to finding them. When it comes back in with deep Stravinsky-esque marcato shots, the chase is on, with the hunter presumably firing away and the prey, as the title would suggest, dodging to the best of their ability. Knowing that Bishamon is one of the 7 divine generals and Yato is merely a homeless minor god, the music makes a lot of sense given their relative levels of power and unequal feelings of enmity towards one another. It also makes the piece feel much more serious by comparison to all of the more electronic and rock-oriented battle tracks. There's a certain level of playfulness when a constant beat is going, one that, while still serious, can be played in contexts with less stakes. Like many of Iwasaki's works, a standard electronic, rock, or fusion-based battle track would have made just as much sense in this situation, but by deliberately choosing to take that risk and tone things down, the intensity actually increases, even if the music doesn't. And of course we have Gurren Lagann, the series that put Iwasaki, as well as a lot of the staff that now make up Studio Trigger, on the radar of anime fans the world over. Gurren Lagann is a story with a little bit of everything. It's goofy, over-the-top, good versus evil, power of friendship, robot antics, but it's also a deeply emotional coming-of-age story that deals with themes of romance, depression, governmental injustice, imposter syndrome, self-worth, and a plethora of other things that somehow manage to come together to form a coherent narrative. There's certainly no shortage of atmospheres and feelings that Iwasaki was tasked with depicting through music, and it's likely the reason why there are so many different types of music in the soundtrack. It also likely explains why the soundtrack is arguably one of his most cinematic, often sounding more like a traditional film score than your run-of-the-mill TV anime series. The track playing right now is a perfect example of this, as it serves as the overture of the heroes and their adventure, teasing the two main themes of overcoming obstacles and believing in yourself, or at least believing in the me that believes in you. The sense of rising in both the melody and harmonies gives off the impression of one's spirits lifting, as well as more literally the feeling of moving upwards, something that is important to Simon and Kamina as they dig towards the surface of the planet they've been living under their whole lives. And then it bursts through, letting the brass drop out as the strings take the main melody of the second main theme, one that captures the scale of the world and the ambitions of the characters now awoken to this new world. It might be due to association with such a fantastic series, but anytime I hear this second theme, I immediately get chills. And as much as I like saying that for music I enjoy, this is the only piece of music that I can honestly say has never failed to give me chills every time I hear it. There's so much to unpack with this theme, from the way it sounds uplifting and melancholic at the same time to the arrangement that manages to capture the grand scale of the story while still feeling deeply personal. But as much as I'd like to really dig into it, that deserves a more dedicated analysis video. So with that, let's get into the final piece I'd like to mention, and one of the main reasons I made this video in the first place. Probably the most well-known work by Iwasaki, Libera from Hell is the epitome of what his music is all about, fusing unconventional styles and sounds together to depict the narrative in a way that the individual parts simply wouldn't be able to capture on their own, at least not as well. Much like the track Esdeath in Love from before, Libera from Hell takes two seemingly incompatible styles of music, hip-hop and opera, and blends them together to create something that actually kind of works. It's certainly not going to be something that most people would listen to all the time, but there's also something about this odd pairing that makes it a lot more pleasant to listen to than Esdeath in Love. If you're already familiar with Gurren Lagann, and if you aren't, why the hell not, you'll already know that hip-hop is the style of music Iwasaki chose to represent Kamina. I could come up with a few reasons for why he chose hip-hop, but the most basic would be that, in this world of mainly theatrical orchestration and a bit of jazz fusion, hip-hop is untrodden territory, matching well with Kamina's spirit of adventure and leadership, and is a style that doesn't fit the mold as well as something like punk rock, which also could have represented him in much the same way. The track itself doesn't have any cool production or profound lyrics, but the lyrics are representative of Kamina's never give up attitude, a mantra that manages to awaken in all the characters moving forward. On the flip side, Libera me is a Latin phrase meaning deliver me, and most notably an 8-line Catholic chant. As one would expect, this is deeply tied to the concept of death in Christian faith, with the words asking God to have mercy upon the deceased, granting their soul a place in heaven. In essence, this is an acceptance of death, one where the parted soul can only pray that they are deemed worthy. Again, those familiar with Gurren Lagann will already see the relevance of these two types of music coming together in the final episodes where Team Daiguren is facing off against the Anti-Spiral. The Anti-Spiral essentially act as the overseers of the universe, enacting their form of righteousness by eradicating worlds that will eventually lead to the end of all existing life. The humans and beastmen of Earth are defiant of those who would seek to destroy their world for a cause they believe they can overcome by working together. Acceptance of death facing off against belief in one's own power. Righteous authority versus rebellious justice. Deep-rooted classical opera versus new age hip-hop.
Fight the power! Fight the power!
There are many ways this could have been handled musically, but by having these extremely clashing styles of music come together into a song that not only sounds pretty good, but actually matches the theatricality of the rest of the soundtrack is nothing short of incredible. Whether or not you consider yourself a fan of Iwasaki Taku or not, I find it hard to believe that anyone could actually dislike his music. You might not actively enjoy some of it, but with the amount of variety within his compositions, there's bound to be at least one piece of music that you can say you enjoy listening to. And while he may not be the most well-known composer in the world of anime, his level of creativity and actual ability to pull off his crazy ideas is nothing short of mind-boggling, especially once you start piecing together what he is doing and why. But what do you guys think of Iwasaki Taku? I obviously couldn't talk about every piece that he's written that I like, and I haven't heard much from him in recent years that has really stuck with me the way that these soundtracks have. But I'm sure that if I give his more recent projects like Copcraft another watch or listen, there'll probably be just as much to unpack in there. So if you'd like to see me do another analysis video on Iwasaki or one of his other soundtracks, or maybe just another composer entirely, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can also support me over on Patreon, where you'll have voting rights to any of my future videos anyway. And if there are any tracks by him that you really like, make sure to let me know down in the comment section below. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you in the next one.